You're listening to a Mamma Mia podcast.
Mamma Mia acknowledges the traditional owners of land and waters that this podcast is recorded on. When you think of a woman being stalked, you probably think of a dark street and a jilted lover, perhaps an ex-boyfriend or an ex-husband. As a word, though, since so much of our lives have moved online, stalking has become pretty watered down as an idea. We joke about Facebook stalking an old boyfriend because we're curious about whatever happened to that guy who took us to the formal. We stalk old friends who ghosted us by Googling them. And we style stalk cool women by scrolling back through their Instagram feeds for fashion inspo. The way we talk about stalking these days is basically to describe a harmless way to kill time, a fleeting, victimless pastime. The whole point being that the person you're stalking will never know about your online research. But that's not what this episode is about. From Mamma Mia, I'm Mia Friedman. You're listening to No Filter, and you're about to meet Nicole Madigan, who was stalked for 3 years by a woman she didn't know. A woman who became so obsessed with Nicole that she tried to ruin her life. As a journalist, Nicole Madigan was used to being contacted at all hours and on her phone all the time. She'd covered domestic violence, coercive control, and even stalking. But what she'd never experienced was being messaged every day by a woman she'd never met, who was obsessed with her. When Nicole started dating for the first time since her divorce, she started to receive some messages from a woman she didn't know. These messages were a little bit weird, but they were pretty harmless at first. But pretty soon Nicole found herself in a constant state of anxiety for herself, her children, and her new partner. The reason this stranger started stalking Nicole and the terrifying way it escalated are all detailed in the book she's written about the experience that's called Obsession. And Nicole Madigan joins me today to tell the story.
Nicole, what was life like the year before you and Adam started dating?
It was good and it was bad. So I had recently separated from my husband of 12 years. We'd been together, all our adult lives. We met when I was 18. So it was one of those separations that were kind of long and drawn out. For me, as is often the case, for him, it was more of a sudden shock. So, the aftermath of that can become quite difficult. So in that sense, I'd had a lot of difficult months, but on the flip side, I was also working at finding myself again and being an independent person and an adult and a single mum to my kids and just learning to be happy again and be happy with who I was and myself and my freedom, if you want to use that sort of a term, to just live and have a bit of peace.
Dating the same person since you were 18, that's really interesting. So how old were you at this stage and how old were your kids?
So I was 37.
Wow.
It's a funny
You'd never been with anyone else but your husband?
No. So I was only 18 when I met my ex-husband. And so, any boyfriends I had before that, I was a kid. So no adult dating whatsoever when I found myself sort of single in my late 30s. And I was still sort of focused on just myself, and my family and just enjoying finding out who I was. So I hadn't even gone near or looked at dating apps or anything like that. They just terrified me and I had no experience with it. So yeah, when it came time to have a first date with Adam, it was really strange because here I was at 37 having never gone on a date with an adult man.
Wow. How old were your kids?
Kids were 8, 6.5 and 3.
They were still little ones. And it was actually at a football game where you first crossed paths with Carissa.
Yeah, so we were at a sort of off-season footy catch-up. Boys were all playing cricket with the dads and things like that. Adam was one of those dads, but I didn't really know him well then. Obviously, we'd crossed paths, but a loose acquaintance at best. I had noticed that there was another woman there, and a little later in the day, I was, taking some photos of the kids playing cricket, which you do, as a way to kind of just deflect a bit of small talk, really, just take some photos. And I'm scrolling through it, and I heard someone say, "Are you taking photos of Adam?" And I saw this woman, she'd just walked past me and she just kept going. So I just kind of had a little giggle with the mum next to me and forgot about it. Went home that night, I got a message request from Facebook saying to me, "Oh, hi, I didn't mean anything by that comment I made at the football today. I just was hoping you'd take some photos of Adam for the football page. And that didn't really make sense to me, but I thought, oh, she obviously knows him. I didn't sort of give it a lot of thought at that point. It was just a bit weird.
Was it just one text message that night or just one message on Facebook?
It was just that one message that night. And then about a week later, I got a message from her again saying, oh, hi, can I ask you a question? And I said, okay. And she wrote back, we're just wondering if you're married or not. And I wrote back, oh, why's that? And she said, oh, I've just been talking to Adam about it and we were just wondering and we're having a bet on it or something like that. And I thought, that's strange. So I just kind of stopped answering. And then about a week later, she sent another message to say, oh, we're still wondering whether you're married or not. And I was with my mum when I got this second message. My mum's a little bit cautious and she was quite protective of me at that stage. And she sort of said, this is getting a bit weird. Who is this woman just messaging you? Why don't you just send Adam a message and tell him his girlfriend is bothering you and you know, that she should leave you alone. And I sort of said, oh, I wonder if he knows about it. You know, she's making it sound like he does. You know, it's a bit awkward. But, you know, you do what your mum says. So I did that. You know, I sent him a message on Facebook and said, look, I'm just letting you know that I'm getting these bizarre messages from Carissa. And he wrote back quite quickly to say, you know, I did not know and she's not in my life at the moment. And, you know, I'm really sorry. This is embarrassing and I hope it doesn't happen again kind of thing. And I said to my mum at that stage, oh, he sounded embarrassed, but he didn't sound all that surprised to me, like didn't seem like total shock. And really, then I didn't hear from her again for another 12 months. And that's when it all started.
But you did hear from Adam again.
I did. Yeah, I did. It's a funny thing. And I guess it's a little bit ironic when you look back on it because, you know, he sort of sent me a message a couple of weeks later just to say, oh, have you had any more messages from Carissa? You know, I'm really sorry about that. And I sort of said, oh, no, you know, it's okay and made a bit of a joke about it. And it just sort of evolved from there. You know, we started sort of, you know, one message was another message and another message. And then they sort of got more often and more sort of serious, I suppose. And this went on for several months. And really that sort of connection that we built was built online kind of through messages, you know, a sort of a modern day kind of pen pal situation. It was quite a while before we went on a date. And it was kind of when we realized we were leaning on each other and telling each other things that were quite personal, even though we weren't really friends in person or hadn't been.
So did you actually, I mean, you probably weren't thinking about Carissa anymore, but, you know, couples often talk about their origin stories. Were you ever curious about, hey, what was that about? And you know that she said that you were both wanting to know if I was married. Is that true? Like, did you ever actually interrogate that a little bit or you just forgot about it?
Yeah, we had one conversation about it early on. So on our first date, we had one of those first dates where we just talked and talked and talked because we had so much to say and we talked so much online, I suppose. We had hours of conversation in person. And yes, that was one of the conversations that I kind of asked, like, what's the deal there? It wasn't a really deep conversation or anything, but, you know, he had told me about meeting her and how their sort of relationship had evolved and some of her behaviours that had become, you know, a bit toxic and concerning to him. Just that kind of extreme kind of possessiveness, I suppose, you know, and saying and doing unusual things in public and things like that. So a bit sort of controlling and belittling and just things that had made him uncomfortable and made him think that it just wasn't, you know, going to work. And her unwillingness to accept that initially when that had happened with him as well. I don't think at that point or at any point he ever foresaw what unfolded in the end.
How long had they dated for?
On and off for a couple of years, sort of. By the time they'd first met and ceased contact, it was a couple of years, yeah.
So were they in any kind of contact at that stage? Like on that sports team gathering that you talk about, she was there, he was there. Would they have like said g'day, or was it like, was he like, oh no, she's here? Was she kind of stalking him and turning up at things, or she had every right to be there because her kid was in the team?
So at that point, it was a little bit of both. So he had, at that particular point in time, was making an attempt to be civil and friendly with her. She was quite obsessed with remaining friends with him after they had broken up. Obviously, this is third-party information. I wasn't around then, but that's what I'm told, that she really wanted to do that and he had attempted to do that. She knew that gathering was on and wanted to be there and was there, even though she didn't kind of interact with anyone. So I guess at that point he was experiencing a kind of unwillingness to let go. By the time I had contacted him about these messages, that had escalated into zero contact and him having to have blocked her on all of his devices and social media as well.
So things got serious between you and Adam after that first date. You decided that you were done with dating after one date. And you guys ended up, did you move in together or you just sort of got serious quite quickly after a year? Because that was the time that she next made contact.
Yeah. So it was sort of a slow burn and then a sort of rapid rise, I suppose. You know, those first few months we didn't see each other much and it was mostly sort of messages and things like that, and maybe sort of some get-togethers with all of the kids in groups because the kids knew each other and things like that. I had things to smooth out as well before we sort of took it to that level. It was about a year after that catch-up that she contacted me again, but it would have been about sort of 5 or so months into our dating relationship. And it was the night she contacted me. It was kind of our first event that we were holding as a couple. So we weren't living together yet. And it was at Adam's apartment that we were getting together to watch the footy grand final. We had all our friends over and our kids were all there. And it was a simple day, but a really momentous day for me, having come out of a really tumultuous several years to doing this simple thing, getting together, watching the footy. It was a big deal for me. So it was a really special day, even though it was a simple day.
Were you and Adam Instagram official yet? Had you put him on your socials?
No, we hadn't. We hadn't done anything like that. And perhaps this is what triggered all of this to begin with. Who knows? But Adam's not a big social media user at all. I hadn't seen him use it at all in the time that I had kind of known him. But that night, his team on the footy, and he's a, mad AFL fan, and we were having a good day. So we took a whole bunch of photos, and he did post a few on Facebook that night. It wasn't any kind of big announcement that we were a couple or anything like that, but we were both in the photos.
What time did your phone ping?
Around 10 o'clock. So everyone had gone. We'd put the kids to bed. They were exhausted and we were just cleaning up and getting ready to just go to bed. And my phone pinged and I just assumed it was one of the family saying, thanks for a good day. But of course, it wasn't. It was a message from a fake account. So it was a fake name, no profile picture or anything like that. But the content in the message made it pretty clear that it was someone who had known Adam or had dated him previously. At that point, I didn't know who.
The name of the account was Adam is a Loser. And the text read, or the message read, how do you like my sloppy seconds? Might go hit up your ex-husband on Plenty of Fish. I used to sleep in that West Coast jersey. Did you straight away think it was her?
I just was in shock and I thought, who on earth? What is this? And I showed him straight away, of course. His mind immediately went there and he said it. And of course, when he mentioned it, my mind went back to that day at the football field and those messages.
As you were sort of processing what was happening, another message came through and this one was more explicit. It said, enjoy sleeping in the bed we fucked in hundreds of times. How did you feel when you read that?
My mind just went, is this normal? What is happening here? And is this what I'm about to walk into by being a separated woman who's now dating? So I was really in shock. I hadn't been spoken to like that before. But at that point, I wasn't scared or anything. I was just really upset. I was just really emotional and kind of disgusted and grossed out as well. Like, any word you can think of, that's how I felt at that point. And I was just really upset.
What was Adam's immediate response?
He was really apologetic. He looked a bit panicked, I thought, sort of like he knew who it was straight away. And he had that look at his face like, oh, shit kind of thing, what's about to happen here. And that night she sent him a couple of messages too, just kind of abusive messages.
Abusive in what way? Like abusive, like, why did you leave me? Threatening?
At that point, they were just sort of nonsensical abuse, like just telling him what an asshole he was. Didn't really make sense, just like mine didn't. It just seemed like uncontrolled anger. And because I was so kind of emotional, we kind of just spent that time talking about who this person was, what the history was. I tried to get a bit more information from him. Do I need to be worried about this? I'm a journalist and I write about domestic violence and all of these things. So, obviously it's going to come to my mind that, okay, there's the crazy ex-girlfriend. This is not good. This is not a good sign. And I told him that as well. I was open about it, and he was quite distraught and worried, but also really supportive. So we talked it through and decided, look, we're going to block the account and hope that this was just an outburst.
Was it?
No, it wasn't. It wasn't. And in fact, about an hour and a half later that night, I got a text message from my ex-husband, and it just simply said, Carissa says hi.
Oh, God.
Yeah. And when I got that, the feeling shifted a little bit. She meant it. She's actually contacted him, and I wonder, what is she doing?
Up next, Nicole explains what the next 12 months looked like and how the constant harassment from Carissa escalated.
What did the next year look like?
About a week after that, I got more messages from her, but these ones were in her own name. So they came from the same account that she had Facebook messaged me from that year prior. And these messages, in those early months, they were mostly focused on telling me Adam didn't love me and that, he still wanted her, and using me to make her jealous and all of those sorts of things. That was very much the focus. He's going to leave you, all of that sort of thing. At the same time, she'd also be messaging him, sort of telling him what was he doing with someone like me, and then all these terrible things about me, and then sort of rotating to other message where it was like trying to remind him of how great she was. It was very contradictory, all around. She also was sending him messages, about me, telling him things about me that weren't true, just about, my past relationship with my ex-husband and things like that, and what a slut and a whore I was, and a bitch and everything else.
What was your first instinct? To just say, leave me alone, block?
I did nothing. So I didn't respond at all at this point, and I would block the accounts. So, I did that sort of standard thing that you're told to do, ignore it. I don't really know why. At that point, I just thought, okay, so it's someone trying to get attention. Let's just not give them attention and they'll get bored. But she would just make new ones, in her own name and send more messages. And they were always sent in a flurry. So you wouldn't just get your big message. It would be ding, a message, and you'd look at it, put it down, and then ding, a message, and ding, a message, and, late at night or early in the morning, and, random times of the day. So it was a really anxiety-inducing experience because it was happening all the time. During that period, she also contacted my mum as well and met up with my ex-husband and let us know about that.
And what did she tell them? What did she say to your ex-husband? What did she say to your mum?
Well, I never really knew what she said to my ex-husband because at that point, we weren't on speaking terms. She just kind of let us know that she'd seen him and that, they had plans and she would reveal them all soon, and you just never know what can happen when two people hate the same people. It was all very threatening and, something's about to happen, and that became a theme through the whole 3 years, something is about to happen.
Did she ever threaten you physically?
No, not physically. It was always just something was about to happen to blow up my life. That's how it always felt.
It was like terrorism, psychological terrorism.
Yeah. And it really evolved and changed over time. So, in this first 6 months, it was very much focused on me and Adam. So the two of us, contacting both of us, putting us both down, contacting the people we knew. She ultimately, and this is what triggered my first call to the police, she ultimately stole my profile photo and made a profile account in my name, sent herself messages and screenshotted them and sent those around. And the messages that she had the fake me send her were messages similar to the ones she was sending me. So really abusive and vulgar and things like that. So I became really kind of scared at that point that she was going to try to really damage either my reputations or my relationships. And, it was already sort of taking a toll on home or my relationships, because I was starting by this point to become quite consumed by it.
Of course. I wanted to ask what you called it in your head. Like, did you start to think of her as your stalker? Did you think of it as harassment?
Probably harassment, I think. I wasn't quite sure. I didn't put the term stalking on it for a really, really long time. And in fact, it was the third police officer that used that word.
And you were shocked when you first heard someone else use it about your situation.
Yeah, I was.
Why is that? I mean, you've been a court reporter. You've reported on domestic violence. What was your idea of what a stalker was?
I guess it's similar to what it is to a lot of people. So somebody sort of loitering outside your home, calling you with the heavy breathing, turning up at your workplace and things like that. This stalking, despite its evolution, was restricted to my knowledge to online stalking, phone, email, Facebook, Instagram. Although in the end there was some implied physical stalking, but I just didn't know. And look, at this early stage, about 6 months in, I didn't even know whether this was something illegal or not. Is it illegal to just be mean to somebody? But I knew it was starting to really wreak havoc with my mental health. And once she did the fake account, I thought maybe that is illegal and maybe we could get somewhere. And so that was the first time we sought help from police.
And what did the police say?
So we contacted at this first point a police officer that Adam knew, so it was a friend of his. He advised us against making a formal complaint and said that in many cases this can escalate the behaviour of the perpetrator. And look, to a degree, I understood what he was saying. I have covered a lot of domestic violence, and we all know that sometimes when someone puts a DVO out on somebody, the outcome is terrible and it can be devastating and sometimes it's deadly. So I understand why he was saying that. But at the same time, the message that you get is there's nothing you can do about it. You're on your own. He did suggest sending her some formal communication to say, if you continue to contact us, we will take legal action. That was his advice. And we followed that advice. We drew up an email and we sent her that email. And we thought it had worked because we got no reply to that email and no contact from her for probably around 5 months. It was just peace and quiet. And we really thought, wow, that's all we needed to do. We just needed to tell her to stop. But of course, about 5 or so months later, it started back up again. Only this time it was just very focused on me. Adam never heard from her again and hasn't to this day. And her sort of approach changed. It didn't seem to be so much about breaking up me and Adam anymore. It seemed to be more about upsetting me and causing damage to my life.
Some of the things she said, or all of the things she said were awful, but she was very personal. She was very personal about your appearance. Talk about doing a number on your head. How did your and Adam's relationship thrive and flourish during this time? Because it did.
Yeah, it's interesting because, the way I kind of described it was kind of like it became a constant noise, but a background noise. We had to learn to or try to compartmentalize it a little bit when it was happening or when I was having a bit of a meltdown or an episode about it, which I often did because it used to get to me quite a lot. We'd deal with that in the moment and that could be quite intense, it was difficult, it certainly put a strain on things and I resented that. I resented the strain that it was putting on something that I felt could have been really perfect.
Did you start doubting him? Like, were there times when you just doubted yourself? Like, her saying things that he'd said or that your mother had said or that she'd done or that she hadn't done. Like, did you start to question reality and who you could trust?
Yes and no. It's interesting. I've been asked that question a few times. Like, it was always this tug of war between logic and emotion. So, like in the beginning, even though she was saying one thing to me, total opposite things to him, and almost as though we wouldn't show each other the messages. So when you're seeing them both together, you can see what's going on. So logic tells you what's going on, but you still can't help how you feel about it. And a lot of times in the later stages where she would like to have this public narrative that she was sort of seeing him all the time, a lot of that was during COVID. So no one was going anywhere. It seemed to be just an attempt to make me feel bad or to make me look silly. I wasn't quite sure, but we all knew reality, but it was still hard to sometimes separate that from your emotion.
Nicole, did you stalk her back? Like, did you go down the Google rabbit warren and look at her socials and work out who her friends were and where her kids were at school to just get a better sense of it? Like, did she have a job? Who was she?
I did a little bit. As I said in the beginning, she was contacting me all on Facebook. So her Facebook was pretty much private. I couldn't see anything there. I couldn't see much about her online. And what I did see, she didn't seem to mix in any of my circles, which I was extremely relieved. I was more just looking to see how much damage can she do. Fortunately, with my mum, we're very close. So she knew about this person right from the beginning. So, anything that she got from her, she sort of was like more telling me like, okay, this has happened here. I'll send you a screenshot. But, I looked up Instagram and other social media and there didn't seem to be any activity there. So I just thought she mustn't be on those sites or anything like that.
Did she have a job? Was she on LinkedIn?
Not on LinkedIn. So there wasn't much. There wasn't really much to see. I did find an Instagram account of hers, but it looked inactive. It didn't look like it had been used for a couple of years. So, which is why when I got that notification, the first Instagram notification from her, when I heard that notification sound, I didn't get that horrible feeling of dread at all. I just picked up my phone like any other day. But obviously at that point, she had changed focus and went to Instagram, and Instagram became the main method of contact and stalking.
What did she do on Instagram?
So the first time she contacted me that way was, I remember this day really well because we were moving. We had been living in my home and we'd sold it. I'd sold it and we were moving into a place together. We were moving all the kids and both of us together. So we were packing. It was just him and I at home and we were just boxing everything up and excited.
It was exciting that day.
Yeah, we had a couple of drinks and music going and just trying to make it fun. And I went to have a break and I heard my Instagram notification and I had a look at it and it said Carissa00 or whatever it was has tagged you in a post. So my heart kind of jumped up to my throat because I thought, that's a public thing, so I'm fumbling. And I went to the post and, this probably will sound silly, but it was frightening to me. So it was a picture of something she'd obviously cooked, a pie or something like that. And she'd used my name. She said, I've baked a tart. I call this the Madigan soggy bottom made from leftovers. And then underneath it with the hashtags, you'll be hearing a lot more from me. Get ready or something like that, giving the finger emoji. So I kind of went, she's tagged me, she's named me, and now she's warning me that there's more to come. That's how I felt when I saw that. And so I took a screenshot, as I always did, and I quickly looked up how to untag yourself from something. So I did that. From then on, that Instagram page that was in her name, quite public, basically became dedicated to posting about me.
You reported it, obviously.
I would report each post that went up. Most of them didn't get taken down. And look, the Instagram posts, they really varied. Sometimes they were really disgusting memes that she'd gone to the effort of making, about me. This is where she started really going quite hard on my appearance and my job and all that sexual stuff that you mentioned before. And it was all really, really public. And it affects you in a number of ways because there's the first one is this person is so preoccupied with me. It has literally been years. They're devoting this much time to it. Where is this going to end? What are they trying to do? It's just really disconcerting. And it was becoming scary to me that it was going on for so long. Self-esteem wise, you get told, and that you shouldn't really take on what other people say to you, especially someone who means nothing to you. But it's very difficult when those insults are so unique and so personal and seem to be tailor-made for me. It really took a toll, that's all you see. Every time you look in the mirror, that's what you're seeing is these same things that I found really hard to switch off from as well.
It had been going on for so long now. Were you feeling more or less scared as time went on?
More. So in the beginning, it was really heightened and terrifying and emotional. throughout the middle, I tried to just block it out. I just went for that approach that I'll just try and block it out. I did go to the police once in that middle time, and I pretty much got told to go and keep a diary and call 000 if there was a problem. So I really felt there's nothing police can do. I have no choice but to switch off. But I couldn't really do that. I tried to ban myself from looking at the account because they tell you just don't look. But just the very thought of not knowing what was being put out there about me, you know, was too hard to resist, I guess, you know. So I did look and I was aware of it.
Did you have to tell your kids about it?
No, I didn't, because they were too young to be on social media. So I had hoped that they wouldn't come across it. Unfortunately, you know, my eldest son in the earlier parts of this had overheard my ex-husband speaking with her. So he did have a couple of questions, you know, about her for me, which was unfortunate. But I really tried to keep it quite surface level for them. They were really young, and I felt that the chances of them stumbling across it were limited.
Were you worried for their physical safety and your own?
Over time I was, because as things progressed on Instagram, she started posting things that were quite personal. So she found out our home address and posted that online, and that was quite a new home, and that concerned us.
Did that freak you out?
Yeah,
I mean,
it really did. And we sat there saying to ourselves, okay, how could she have figured this out? And we were really starting to get used to the fact that she was, and I think a lot of people who stalk are like this, very, very skillful at using social media and the internet to find things out. And we were becoming a bit detective-like ourselves, because we went back and looked at those hashtags where she put the address, and she also made a reference to loves to run. So we thought that's weird too. And Adam was a runner. So he sort of said to me, could it be Strava? That's an app, a running app that tracks your runs. And I thought, surely not. So we logged into his account, and, you know, social media this is one of the faults with all the social medias. They do default everything to public. And if you're not quite used to it, you don't think to set it to private. So even this running app, his running app that he didn't even have a photo on or anything, he just used it to track his running, was set to public. But all of his runs started on our street and finished at our street.
and interesting that she's almost bragging about, like, she's almost leaving breadcrumbs to say, look what I can do. Look how I've found you. Nowhere is safe.
That's exactly right. Absolutely. And that was what frightened me the most the entire time. She seemed to go to great lengths to want me to know that she was watching and want me to know what was happening. Look, even at the very beginning, when I got messages from other names, fake accounts, those didn't seem to even be very well concealed. I'm not sure if you read this in the book, but one of the accounts, the first time I got a message from a fake account, I clicked on the profile, and it was all blank, of course, but the username was her name. And I thought, could that be an accident? I don't know. I don't think so. I think she wants me to know. So, you know, there was the address, and a similar thing happened with our wedding. She posted and this was another silly mistake on our behalf, but she posted online a meme of the Wedding Crashers movie, and then the location, the date, and the time of our upcoming wedding in the hashtags. And I just nearly dropped the phone, like, how on earth does she know this?
Because obviously you'd locked down all your socials. You weren't posting, anything.
No, absolutely not. My Facebook's always been private, and I'd been forced into ensuring that, my work Instagram and my private Instagram were very separate. So I had no idea how this could happen. And, I've rung Adam and I've rung my mum, like, what's going on? And so I Googled, mine and Adam's name.
Yeah.
And I just put in the word wedding just to see, is there anything on there? And of course, what comes up is this web page. So there's a web page called The Knot that you can create to invite your family and friends to your wedding, which we had done. We thought it was a bit of a kind of dorky way to just send things and put photos up. And it was free, so we just put it together. But as it turns out, those are also set to a default public setting. Would you believe it? And so all the details were there for anybody to see.
But so what did you do? Did you change the wedding?
No, we didn't, because it was only a couple of weeks out. It was so close. And I hated myself that day. I thought, how could I have been so stupid to not have checked the privacy settings of this website when all of this is going on?
Nicole, as if it was your fault.
No, it wasn't. But I was so obsessed with this happening to me. I should have thought about it, but I hadn't. I just assumed something like that would not be public, but it was.
What modifications did you make on the day, thinking about whether she was going to be there or not?
We had to let the venue and the celebrant and anyone that was involved know that if they got any calls to cancel anything or change anything, to call us back to make sure, and just to keep an eye out. And we sort of, told a couple of people to keep an eye out.
And what word did you use to describe this woman? Were you starting to use the word stalker by now? It had been years.
No, I still wasn't. I found it so hard to talk about. I really didn't talk about it with anybody. I just felt so humiliated by the whole thing and so helpless and silly almost that I just didn't tell anyone. I spoke to my mum about it and my brother, but I really didn't go really deep into how it was impacting me because I didn't know if I was overreacting. I just felt like, come on, get a grip. Like, how much mind space are you giving this person? You shouldn't be. You feel like you really shouldn't be, but I was.
So what made you go to the police for the third time?
Well, all of this personal stuff that was going online was starting to really alarm me. So there was the wedding, there was the address. She'd also put online that she had moved to our suburb. I don't know whether she had or not, but she had put that online to say, I'm living just around the corner and all of this sort of thing. At the same time, around that time, I was getting really scared and I was sitting doing some work one day and I was thinking about it and I got another Instagram message request and it was another name that I hadn't heard of. And I just thought, oh, not this again, like another name. But this time the message was claiming to be from someone who knew Carissa, who was related to her, in fact, and who had identified me from the posts that she was putting up and was reaching out to offer support because she herself had been on the receiving end of this type of behaviour 10 years prior.
From Carissa?
Yeah, from Carissa, and this was a relative of hers. That's what they were saying. So I was reading it thinking, is this just her? Is this her? So I wasn't too sure, but I did click on this person's profile and it looked quite authentic. I was kind of horrified to see that profile, we did have a lot of friends in common and, came from a similar industry and background and she had identified me. So I was a little bit panic-stricken about that. But it seemed authentic enough that I thought the prospect of an ally was just too irresistible. So I did write back to her and thank her for getting in touch with me. But the fear that I could feel from her words that articulated what had happened to her and how nervous she felt even reaching out to me to offer help just increased my fear levels even more because I was already starting to get panicky about this and where it was going to go. And knowing that she'd done it before and that this person was terrified, I thought, I've got children. She knows where we live. I'm going to have to try again. I took a different approach, though. I made a cybercrime report online because that enabled me to write down the words to describe what was happening over a long period of time. It's just I wasn't doing it any justice when I tried to tell someone about it. It just sounded like a squabble. I couldn't describe it very well. So I wrote this gigantic cybercrime report, clicked send, and just waited. And nothing really happened for months until I followed it up online. And it said on there that it had been referred to my local police station. So I called them and it had in fact been assigned to a caseworker. They called me back a couple of days later, and it was in that conversation that this policewoman who was incredible, listened to everything I was saying, and her reaction to what I was saying just made me feel so validated. She wasn't dismissive of it at all. She was shocked and horrified and asked me a lot of questions and then ultimately put the label of stalking on it, which was scary, but it was also a relief because I just didn't think I was just this crazy overreacting woman, which is what I was starting to feel like.
So was she charged?
She was ultimately charged, yes. It was a really difficult and long process. So the screenshots and all the evidence that I had kept over the years was critical to that. If I didn't have that, there would be no charge. And this is the difficult thing, and the problem with stalking is because it is a pattern of behaviour that makes up stalking. It's not the behaviours themselves, because on their own, they're often not even illegal. And sometimes they even sound silly. You know, if you go and say, oh, someone left me this gift and I don't want it, or someone's put up a post about me and they've called me rat face or gonzo, you're kind of like, gee, okay, well, kind of get over it. It's not that big a deal. But it's that pattern of behaviour. So if you can prove that, which I was able to do, it's really helpful. And she had done almost everything in her own name. And that sort of, to me, speaks to the fact that as a society, we just don't take this seriously enough, because people who do it are bold enough to not even hide. She wasn't even trying to hide. And in fact, even after the police called her the first time, she put up a post mocking the whole thing, like a big no one cares post. The police don't care. Your mum doesn't care. You know, a whole bunch of things like that, even though the police had spoken with her.
What did the police say that her reaction was when they spoke with her?
They told me she didn't return their calls for quite a few months. So before they actually got to speak to her, she just wouldn't call them back or wouldn't be home. So when they spoke to her, she said to them that I'd just taken everything out of context, and that I obviously just keep looking at her social media and linking it back to me when it's just not true. And I kind of panicked. I thought, oh, you know, what if she's, you know, my mind went back to when she made that fake account in my name. Is that all you need to do? Screenshot some of those and say, well, it's equal. We're just having
she was doing it back to me, yeah.
But obviously that wasn't the case in the end, or the police know the difference. I don't know. But in the end, she was charged with unlawful stalking, and that was based on that evidence. And also I was very, very lucky that this woman who had reached out to me was willing to and did supply a third-party witness statement to say that she had seen these behaviours and was able to identify me from them. So that also helped.
This wasn't the end of my conversation with Nicole. In part 2 of this interview, that's available now via the link in our show notes, we discussed the moment that Nicole came face to face with Carissa and what happened when she took her to court. Here's a taste.
And this was only a split second, but she walked in, saw me, stopped in front of me, locked eyes with me. I swore she was going to say something to me, like I froze.
You can find a link to that episode in the show notes. And Nicole's experience as a victim of stalking has been shared in her gripping memoir, Obsession, a journalist and victim survivor's investigation into stalking. And it is available now at bookstores. There'll be a link in the show notes. This episode was produced by Cassie Merritt and Emmeline Gazillis. The executive producer of No Filter is Eliza Ratliff, with sound production by Madeline Joannou. I'm Mia Friedman. Thanks for having me in your ears.